montage, but I think everybody has some kind of photographs on your computer. So just use any of these for when you test when I show the InDesign right now. So don't focus on what is the content of these photographs. What I wanted to try to tell you here is how you can use InDesign to create this multi-panel montage. And this is for your second assignment. And to do that, of course, we need to start learning how to use InDesign. So InDesign, as I told you briefly before, the InDesign and Illustrator are generated by the same company, but not by the same people. So you will see when you open InDesign that they look roughly the same. And I'll just reset this. But the first thing you'll note is that InDesign itself is lighter. So it has this light view of all the palettes. And it has also a little bit more of these extra options at the top. And all of these are very useful, and we use it a lot for adjusting layout, adjusting size of many things. So you can replace many of the drop-down palettes or these palettes that come out. For example, transformation. You can do a lot of transformation changes, a lot of changes to your fonts and the type through this top menu that is not as useful in the Illustrator. So that's a big change. Another thing that is very different is that InDesign is a multi-page tool. So when you generate a document in InDesign, you specify the number of pages you want to have. And you can always add and subtract pages in InDesign. So InDesign comes from the field of publishing, generating books, but it's also excellent for generating a single page document or creating a large poster. So we'll get back to how to produce the posters and how to make those really large documents. But from the start now, we'll just focus on a single page document. So what I'm going to do here is just to make a new document. And there, when it comes up, you see that you can now choose to have it letter or A4. So in this case, we're going to create an A4 page. And for this now, it's just, of course, I want to create a single column, multi-panel montage. That's the goal. But we'll just create an A4 page to start with. So in this A4 page, you see now I have some outer margins, and those are just generated from the parameters I specified in there. So those margins you can change yourself. You can create a lot of different columns. So what we're going to do first is just now to make a single column in the center here. And I just put one of these guides by dragging from the ruler from the left here into there. And then I, as we learned earlier today, take the origin up here by clicking in that I was expecting to do. I'm not sure why this okay, there it worked. Yes. So, and then I drag this out to get started at this guide. So what I then see is that my 0 starts at this guide. Because what I want to achieve is now we know the column width of our journals. So for example, many of them are 70 or 75 millimeters in width. So then I can generate a column that is exactly 70 or 75 millimeters if I want to do sort of a smaller. So say that we start with a 75 millimeter column. So now I have my outer restrictions of how that one column figure should look, but we can still place things outside and work on this whole paper. So I still have this whole A4 page that I can see. So with Command 0 or the Windows, no, Control in Windows and 0, you get to see the whole page again. So now I have this internal constraints of how I want this single column figure to look. So next thing we want to do now is that I have images from multiple sources. I have two images that come from bright field microscopy. I have a couple of images that are from fluorescence and a couple of images that come from confocal. And then I have some other illustrations as well. So all of those we want to merge together. So if I then show you those in here, this would be the things that come directly out from my microscope. So in one here, I have a TIFF images that is from the bright field, and it's much larger than what I want to have. The control side is a little bit tilted, and it's also larger, but I don't, as I said before, you shouldn't care about this before you go into InDesign. So you start with these images. And then on the other side, we have the immunofluorescence, where we have the merge of the two channels together, and then you have the single fluorescent channel, the red and the green. So, and the same thing with the confocal, that we have the merged one. Let me see which one was this. Here, yep. And then we have the green and the red channel. So these are very sort of typical things you would start off with. And you see in these that I do not have scale bars in many of these images. And that's the first point to take home, is that don't burn in a scale bar in your image on your microscope or where you acquire these images. Because once you have that scale bar as part of the image, you can never get it out. So then you will have to use that scale bar, whatever it is, wherever it is. And if you would then crop the image, it can be cropped away. So you want to have these images without a scale bar. But how can you then remember or get the scale of this image? And there are two ways you can do this. One is that many of your acquisition software will give you a parameter which is the microns per pixel. So in the first one here, I just named it with a 1.75 micrometers per pixel. So then you already have the scale in there, and you can, whenever you want, generate your scale bar. So that is the absolutely easiest way to do it. On this confocal image, though, I did not remember to have that. But then there's a thing to know that if you have the raw image from your confocal microscope, most often what they do is to put in the parameters of acquisition within the header of this file. And to view that header in the file, what you do is actually that you can drag a file into your Bridge application. So the Bridge application is part of the Creative Suite. And when it opens this file inside, you see all of the hidden information there. So you have properties of the file. And in one part of this properties, there is a description. And from this confocal, for example, you have, and this is very common for most of these microscopes, that you have all the parameters in there. So you have exactly the laser power that you use to generate it, even what types of mirrors you have, and the scanning speed and all of these things. But the main thing you want to see there is that you actually have microns in depth, you have microns in width here. So you see both the size of each pixel in micrometers, but also your total field of view. So you see that this image is 750 micrometers. So just using that, you know your scale bar as well. So there's no need to burn these things in. There are so many ways you can get that and have it available for yourself. So just make sure that you have it, one of these parameters, microns per pixel or total field of view, that you just note it down, either in the file name or somewhere else. And then you're safe. Then you can generate this scale bar afterwards in a much nicer way.
But is it regardless of the file type that you save? Or should it be TIFF file to be able to see it?
It depends on your confocal, but you should make sure to save it as a TIFF, because then you maintain the quality. Most often they can save it in other file format as well. So when you plan making a montage, how you start it can save you a lot of time. So when I use triple fluorescence, which is in this example, I always start with the merged image. So the one that you have, the red and the green. And I start with my active group in the other type of file. And then you want to place these files in. So in InDesign, we also have this place command as we used in Illustrator. I think it's getting tired. Okay. So you have the place command. And with place, then we can go into the examples I had there, going into the montage, and you find your documents. So I start now with, in the bright field, I select the active group image there, and I say open. And then it gives me this option to place this image. So you see two things here. One is that this image is huge, and the other one is that it's much worse quality than I saw it when I opened this in preview before. So why is the image so low resolution in InDesign? And this is actually by design of the software, that the software brings in a small low resolution image called the proxy image that is just there as a placeholder for you to play around with. But it still has the link to the full resolution image. So you can, at any time, you can go in and say up here in says view, you had display performance, and you can say high quality display. So what it does then is that it changes and shows you the high resolution of the image. But then, because you want this to be quick, you want to work with the images at the typical display. And then it shows them in a lower resolution, and they're very quick to work with. So it doesn't matter if you have a 1 gigabyte image file, it will be just as quick to work with.
How do you drag and drop in that PC?
Okay. So the next challenge here comes that this file is now looking really big here. And you want to bring it down. And the first thing you would try, at least that was what, when I started working with InDesign, I take a corner and I pull it like this. But what you see happens is that it doesn't actually shrink the image. It just crops the image. So the default in InDesign is actually to crop and not to scale images. So what you want to do instead is one of two options. You can use the scale command up here, and this is the most efficient one to use. So here it's the same thing that is a bit counterintuitive the first time you look at it. So you have again the coordinates x and y, and you have the width and the height of the image, and you can lock them so that they are constrained, the proportions. But you should not change the size here. So if we look at the whole image, and I say that instead of 564 millimeters wide, this should only be 64 millimeters wide. You see what again happens is that it crops this image. So you cannot specify the width and height of the image in the width and height dialog. What you have to do instead is to use where it says 100% now. So what you go in is to say that instead of 100%, I want this width of this image to be half of the width where I have in my column. So I have 75 millimeters. So instead I will have 37 millimeters in width here. So I can write 37 millimeters where it said 100%, and they say enter. What it does then is that it scales the whole thing to the correct size. So that is something one just needs to get used to in InDesign, that you scale it where it says the 100% instead of scaling in width and height. So then I've placed it in roughly in the place where I want it. And then we can go in and do the same thing with our fluorescence image. And then I use again the merged one with red, green, and blue. And this, then I want it to be a third of 75 millimeters. And that is a difficult math, so you can do 75 divided by 3 millimeters in width. And then you get it to be exactly a third. But then when we zoom in there, you may realize that this may be a bit elongated. We may want this to be square. And that's then where this width and height dialog is very useful. So what we want to do instead is to go up in here, and we look at the width and height. And we say that the height is fine, but I do want the width to be the same as the height. So I can copy the height and then uncheck this small chain, because the chain there shows that you constrain the proportion. So if I break the chain, I can now start to crop this differently. So when I put in that same 18.75 millimeters in width, you will now see what happened there, sorry, is the following, that I've generated now a square image that is just cropped. But then you can say, I did not have the option myself to define what part of this image is cropped. Has it now thrown away the inside of that? But it doesn't. So in here you have what looks like an old focus ring of a analog camera. If you click inside that, you see now that you have the red outer line, and that is your full original image. So now you can either use the hand and drag this image around inside, or use the arrow keys. So you can then choose yourself to move this. And here you see this example why it's not good to have a burnt-in scale bar. So this image has a burnt-in scale bar here. And now I'm locked to either only showing that specific part, or I show something where this is outside. So you really want to avoid that region. So now I have generated this square, and then I want to go back and say that the width of this should be 75 divided by 3 millimeters. But then again, you need to have some space in between those three panels. And if we think about here that we have, say, 1.5 millimeters of white space in between, you actually want the width of this being 75 minus 3 divided by 3 millimeters. Oh, okay, couldn't do that math. 72 divided by 3. We have to do some math ourselves. So now we have generated our first two panels. And now we want to start thinking about the text on these panels. And this is where Illustrator really shines. InDesign works really well. So text always fits inside boxes in InDesign. So what you do is to drag out the box, like so. But you can start to drag it also at the corner, and you can say that I want this box to be exactly this half, something like that. And then I write here, say that this is panel E. So what I've written here is a black E. And then, of course, in this panel, it doesn't work very well with black, so we should go to color, so I select it and make it white. And now there is, of course, a serif type of typeset or font here, and it is actually a Minion, talking about that. But for this example, I prefer the Myriad Pro. And we can make this into a semi-bold and smaller font. So you can make it into something where you think that it looks nice here, but you realize that this E is now totally snug up to the top left corner. And that's not very attractive. So you can you could think, well, what I should do is just to move this whole text box in like this. But that is not the most efficient way to do it. So what you can use instead is in this object, you have something called the text frame options. And in the text frame options, you can have spacing in your text box. So I can say that in my top and every other place, I want to have, say, maybe 0.8 millimeters. So you see now that it has generated this guard zone. So it means that the lettering will not start until 0.8 millimeters in. And the advantage of this is that it does not matter what letter you put in here. If you put I, it is much more tightly towards that side, but it keeps you 0.8 out in there.
How do you enter this menu?
It is, so you select it, and then it's in Object, Text Frame Options. And there are many advantages with this. One is that you can now copy this over to the other side here and just say that I want this to be right justified and maybe then a little bit smaller and not bold but regular. And you can call this, say, AAV5. Oops. Like so. And because I have the same spacing top and everything else, it keeps all of this adjusted very well. And I can do the same thing down to the bottom corner and make this a little bit larger to show you another issue then is that this is top justified. So you have top and bottom as well as left and right. And that you can adjust in the same dialog. So if we go into this object text frame options, you have the vertical justification. And that says top now. And you can have it center, you see it comes in the middle there, or bottom. So if you have it bottom, it comes exactly as the place you would want to. And then we may again go in and put some other text here. Say that this is GFP TH, something like that. And then we see that the text now flows outside. Sorry. I moved around. So what I wanted to show here is that you get a plus at this point. And what this plus there means is that there's hidden text. Text that flows outside your box. And this is easily adjusted just by, of course, reducing font size or expanding your box. So in this case, we probably want to have, again, a smaller and not bold, a regular font size. And you may want to then go in and say pseudo color this to be in our green, to not have red and blue. And then you may want to give the red one RGB, only red. So we can make the text inside this be descriptive of our two channels. So now you have, just by making this the same text box with the same spacing, you have something that is very tidy. And you can move these. And the advantage is that you can now take all of these things and you can move them up to the top panel as well here. So you can adjust, put one to the left, put this one to the right, and then you can change the color to be black. And then you have made it to look identical in all of these. And it makes it very easy to align and group those parts. So next I may want to fine-tune these before I go into the next phase to put in the other figure. So I may crop this one down to make it more efficient. So then I just pull from the bottom there and crop it to the place I want. Or if I need to move this one up, I can see that I can move it up there. So you see here why it's the advantage to keep the whole frame of your image, that now afterwards I can go in here and crop it to be the most efficient use of the space. So if I only want to show the dopamine cells here, I may pull that one down, and then we can start to also crop this one a little bit from the side, like so. And then I can move this one in. And now all of this together, you can group it, and then it becomes one unit with its own text. And then I can move that to the side, and before I do that, I ungroup this again. And you can resize it to be, then it should be 73.5 divided by 2 millimeters to make sure that this will be perfectly half of my column.
Lines around the boxes will be seen.
These lines are not seen at all. So this is one way of viewing in InDesign, that you see all of these boxes. But then if you go to here, you have your view options. So we are looking at normal. If you go to preview, you see that all of these boxes disappear except the one that you have selected. So when you unselect that one, you see how it should look. So you can then switch between these. So we switch back to normal. So now I want to show you how you can then reuse all of this. So spend some time and do one panel per group or unit here. So we group this one, and we can group this one here. And then you can use what we discussed earlier today, the option key. So if you just take this one, press the option, and then I copy the identical one here, and I make 3 copies of this one. And then you can utilize this align tool. So we have a Windows, and you have object and layout align, and we can use the distribute. So here you can specify your spacing again, and we said that we wanted this to be 1.5 millimeters. And then you can just go in, select those 3, have them to be distributed 1.5 millimeters. And if it's calculated correctly, these should be exactly 75 millimeters width. So that looks good. And then the same thing is in here. And then we can align these 2 to have 1.5 at the other, and you align these 3 to the top. So now we have put them in with the exact spacing, and everything looks correct, except for that we have the duplicates of all these figures. And now we're using the fact that we can, in the group, double-click into one of them and go to links. And now in the links dialog here, you actually see which images are used. Let's see if I can show more of the name there. Yeah. So you see that you have the one called SNTH plus GFP is used 3 times. The one that is called transducide is used 2 times. And I'm selecting one of those. And then I can actually go down to this dialog here, or this icon that says relink. So when I click that, it asks me which file do I want to put in instead. And then I can go into the bright field and say I want to put in the control side instead. And now it puts in the control side identical in size. So scaling is the same, it just replaces the other image in there. And you see that it is the right file is in there, but there is an issue that this one is differently rotated than the other one. And now we have the advantage that we have all that image data outside, so you can actually take the corner of that one and rotate it. And what you rotate is just the image, but not the cropping. So then you can do this way, and then you can move it so that you don't get any of the outside of the image. And you don't see that this one was actually not very well rotated. You can adjust it to fit rather well. And then you enter that. So you're not changing the scale, so the scale bar would still be correct for both of these. And then we can do exactly the same thing in these 2, that you can exchange this file in the fluorescence to then be the TH. So you see again, it doesn't move anything, so it's the identical there. And in this one, you can do the same thing and relink it to the GFP. So now the only thing that remains is that you, using the text tool, that you can get rid of the one that is not the correct staining, and you can now change your lettering to be A, B. And there you go. So it's actually rather quick to generate something like this in design, and it is very flexible in the way. Yeah.
So how would you now go about doing the scale bars on these ones?
Yes.
So you have actually
Good question. So in the first setting here, I know the pixel width. So the one thing I do not know is the dimensions. And when I click this link, and you see it here, you see your dimensions. So you see that this is 1600 pixels wide and 1200 pixels high. And I know from the name that 1 pixel is 1.75 micrometers. So it means that it's 1 0.75 millimeter per 1,000 pixels. But how big is this picture then? Because you cannot look at the cropped area, but you see up here that your cropped area is width 36.75 millimeters. But actually, when I click in the center, I see now the width of the original image. So now I know that my image is 42. So if I then create a line, like so, and just have this line black. So having the length of this line, so I copied the full width of the image, which was 42.5 millimeters. And we know that it's 1600 pixels. And it's 1.75 millimeters per 1,000 pixels. So we have these three parameters together. So we want this now to say, how long do I want the scale bar to be? So I want this scale bar to be 1 millimeter, for example. And now it's late in the day, so see if I can do the math. But you have all the parameters there. So we have this long is how many millimeters is that really in the scaled system? And that is divided by, so you should have divided by 1.6 times 1.75. So it would mean that this is actually no, it is not correct, is it? Sorry.
Maybe just put it in brackets.
Yeah, I probably should. For this type, honestly, what I do is to use Excel in conjunction, because it makes your life a little bit easier. So you know your full original image is 42, and then you have its width is 1600 pixels, and then it's 1.75 micrometers per pixel. So then you have the total width of the image is this times that one. So the width is 2.8 millimeters. So 2,800 microns. And the complete width is 42 millimeters. So if I instead want to have one that is 1,000, it should be the total length of this image, which is 42, and that is originally 2.8. So we take this equals that one divided by 2,800 times the original length. So 1 millimeter should be 15.19 millimeters long. So then I take this one in here and write it in there. So that is now a 1 millimeter scale bar. And you can see that the 1 millimeter scale bar is not the most attractive. It is a bit long, but that doesn't matter because now I know what 1 millimeter is. So then I can say that 500 microns would just be this divided by 2. And I have a 500, or now I can go in and say 250, or divided by 2 times, divided by 5 times 2. And now we have a 200 micron scale bar that looks more representative. So it's late in the day, but you realize that you actually had that data in to generate this scale bar. And that is absolutely accurate for what you have done here in the end. So I think this is what you need to know to get started in InDesign, and then we'll go through a lot of more details later. Yes?
On your, if you have double or triple stains, do you have to have the files generated as individual colors, or can you have a merge file and separate it into colors?
Yeah, that's actually one thing I was thinking about early on, if you could do a color separation in InDesign itself. I don't think that you can, unfortunately. It's something I've looked at earlier on, but haven't found a good solution. So I think you need to separate them before. Yeah. And that's the other question. Should you have your red and green as red and green pseudo-colored, or should you have them black and white? And this is, of course, another matter of taste. Because especially when you print them, it's so easy that your red becomes super bright and your green becomes dim, so that it looks the opposite to what you would see on the screen. And the other thing now when thinking about your montage is that now all of these are pixel-based, but of course you may want to bring in also other type of data. But you do that exactly the same way. So if you have, for example, the image we looked at this morning, the qPCR, that this is now a cleaned up version of that. So let's just give this 15 millimeters. I'm out of here. So you just place it in, just like the pixel-based data. So the great advantage with InDesign now is that I have all of these linked. So if I see now that I want to change something in that qPCR data, I can click on this link and I can say that I want to edit original or even edit in another type of software. So I can say that I want to edit this original and it opens InDesign for me. And it gives me the possibility in there to adjust this file. So then you can see that maybe I want to move this up to give it more space. Oh, sorry, not that one. Something like that. And then I save this file and I close it. And when you go back there, you see that it changes that. So it automatically updates inside InDesign. So you don't need to be finished with any of your illustrations when you start putting them together in InDesign. You can do that early on and then just adjust and replace those when you have something new. So that is the first part you now need to know for your assignment. And the other part is, how do I then export this? And to export it to a PDF, it is very simple. You have in the file, you have an export command. And then you can choose in the export to export this as an Adobe PDF. And this, that you have an interactive and a print version. The print version is the one you want to use there. So then I just can save it here, and it asks you a lot of parameters. And these parameters, you do not need to focus a lot of these, but there is on one place, and it's the one called compression. And this gives you a lot of power because you can say that it will now crop all the images to only fit into the frames. So the data you have outside the cropped area, it will throw away, so you don't have that in. And that's the crop image to data frames down here. The other part is that you can now say that I may have reduced all of these images a lot, but it just needs to be looking good in print. So then you can now have them to specify that I want to downsample them to 300 dots per inch. And then it says that it does only do this when they're over a certain limit. And that you don't need to think about, but the only reason why it has this limit before it starts to adjusting the size has to do that with a small rescaling of an image doesn't save very much space, but it reduces the quality quite a bit of that rescaling. So you can leave this headroom as it is, and here it's perfectly fine to use JPEG, because this is now the final image that you will have. So then it's fine that it is destructive. So leave it there as JPEG, and even the medium quality will be perfectly okay. So now I have created a PDF file of this image, and although all the originals were quite big, this PDF file should be super tiny. It is 249 kilobytes, but it still looks really nice in here, hopefully. Because you just have the optimized data that's needed to display it in those panels and nothing else. So it's just enough data to print it at this size and nothing else in there. So it's super optimized. Any other questions?
Most often journals ask for a quick format or APS format.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a good point. That when you publish this, you have often two procedures. You submit PDF files for the first review when they are sent out to reviewers. But then in the second step, you need to produce high-quality EPS files or TIFFs. They still don't accept high-quality PDF files for that. So that procedure we will take on Monday or Tuesday, Monday next week. Because there are quite a number of things you need to think about to package them correctly for the final submission to the journal. So this would be enough for a reviewer submission, and then you would do another one for the journal for the print.
Should you work with the guidelines of, if you have the premise of having a single column, half page, or even full page, should you work with those, they often specify the widths and heights on the homepage, or do you just make it?
Yeah, it is kind of scalable, but it's quite good if you know roughly your limits, because then you start to put your fonts in the right size and everything from the start. So that's why I here started with 75 millimeters, just to know the outer boundaries. But I didn't put the top and bottom so that it could flow anyway it should in the other direction. So I think it's a bit a matter of taste how you like to work it. But they are quite good. Yeah.
Can you link text the same way as you link images?
Yes. In one way you can, in the other way you cannot. So the text, you can link it so that your styles remain the same. And this is something I'll show you when it comes to creating the poster, that you can have heading 1, 2, 3, 4 and paragraph 1, and you can define the styles in InDesign. So as soon as you place in the text again, it formats it exactly the same. But it doesn't work in the way that you can change an H in the Word document and it automatically updates, unfortunately. But it can be working almost as if it was linked. All right, so I guess this part in some ways could have been a little bit quick, but it will be recorded, of course, so you can look through that. And then best of luck with the assignments, and we'll see each other on Monday next week, and then we go through some advanced techniques in Illustrator, a bit more on the InDesign and other things. Thank you all.